This is the screen capture video 12.6, the sixth video for Unit 12. In the last video I was talking about President Bill Clinton in the blue dress and DNA work done with that. Eventually Bill Clinton went on trial, and if you followed the media at the time, back in the mid-90s, you'd have been under the impression that he was on trial for the sexual relationship that he had. And that is incorrect. He was actually impeached not because of his sexual relationship, but because of perjury, lying under oath, which he did commit perjury, and he was impeached, but he was not removed from office. The House of Representatives, the United States House of Representatives, voted to impeach him, and the Senate voted not to go ahead and remove him from office. But interesting, in the 90s, because of the DNA work, a lot of that information about Bill Clinton came to the forefront. Whereas in the 60s, with Lyndon Johnson and his mistress, and even more so with President John F. Kennedy and the many women that he had, and his brother Robert F. Kennedy, notorious womanizers, much of that was kept under the lid. But it was a different time, different culture, and different standards of public understanding of what was thought to be right and wrong, and what was accepted and what was accepted to be mentioned in the public media. But we're hearing more about ex-President Bill Clinton with the Me Too movement, but not as much as some others. Another case that was interesting, and I provide the news link here. This is from years ago. There was a woman who found her daughter, who had supposedly burned to death in a house fire when she was an infant. And when firefighters were called to the house, they found the bedroom had been extensively burned. They claimed that because the daughter was an infant, she didn't have much bone structure, and she would have been completely burned in the fire, and there were no remains. The mother was skeptical for several reasons. It just didn't seem right to her, especially because the bedroom window was open, and she hadn't left the bedroom window open. I think it was in the winter months when the fire occurred. And so she was at a party years later, probably about 6 years later, I don't recall, and she saw a little girl that she thought might be her daughter. And so she acted like there was gum in her hair and pulled some strands of hair and had it tested, and sure enough, it tested as her daughter. And come to find out, a distant relative, I think a cousin, had kidnapped the daughter when she was an infant and raised her as her own. And the daughter was taken from this other woman. She was tried and I believe convicted. And I think the story goes that this woman was eventually reunited with her daughter, but wouldn't have been quite the same after so many years of being apart. Another case that's closer to home is a municipality called Ford Heights. And I don't remember ever hearing about Ford Heights until I came across this story because I was looking up DNA cases. Ford Heights is a suburb of Chicago. It's up on the south side of Chicago. It was formed as a community to provide factory workers for a Ford plant, is my understanding. Immigrants and descendants of European immigrants were hired in the plant. I think in the 40s and 50s, perhaps the plant closed down. I don't remember for sure. And different people moved in, and a number of people were moving out. And so the locals decided to bring in government housing, thinking that they could build up their population with government housing. And that's an interesting perspective, because when you think about it, if people are in government housing, they're probably not going to make very much. They're not going to be paying property tax. And so you have to question and wonder, how are you going to support your municipal programs, your services? And that's the problem they run into. There's a high welfare rate, very, very poor group of people, They're in Fort Heights. It's been described in derogatory terms by a number of people in Illinois and across the United States. High crime rate. Well, you can read these news links that I have. I think at least one of the news links talks about the police, the local police force, just stopped going to work. They just stopped showing up. And how I came across this article is because they had rape kits in a refrigerator that were molding. They'd taken evidence, DNA evidence, and were just letting it rot and weren't moving on it. And nobody was. And so eventually the Cook County Police Department, because it is located in Cook County, the Sheriff's Department for Cook County, took over and started patrolling and went in and found the evidence rotting and things untaken care of. And there was one specific case, I think a 13-year-old had been sexually assaulted, and the guy that sexually assaulted her was in state prison. And at the time that I read the article, I could go on the Department of Corrections website and see the picture and information on the guy. I think he was in there for manslaughter, killing somebody, and had not been charged with the crime of rape. And I don't know that he ever was, unfortunately. But it's a sad case with the police department and the community up in that part of Chicago. But you get up in Chicago and up in those areas, and you start hearing about a different culture, a different approach by police, and corruption that you don't necessarily find in southern Illinois. Okay, well, here's the link. This may or may not take you to the same video list. I'd forgotten that I put it down at the bottom. I should have put that up above with the albinos. In a face-to-face class, a lot of times I'll tell more stories of DNA evidence. Some of it's very interesting. I had Dr. Dan Crane from Wright State University come speak to the college community in the fall of 1996. I met him at a genetics seminar in Cincinnati on an elevator. He got his PhD from Washington University over in St. Louis. And he's traveled around the country testifying on DNA evidence. And there was one particular case in our area that involved the area of Ramsey. It was a rape murder, and a Stuart Heaton who was charged and convicted, and ended up being appealed. And Dr. Dan Crane was called in on the appeal, and he stated that he did not think that the DNA evidence linked Stuart Heaton with the crime. Unfortunately for Stuart Heaton, he lost the appeal and is still in prison. But that case actually made it to Unsolved Mysteries back in the 1990s. And if you'd watched Unsolved Mysteries, you'd have actually gotten to see and hear Dr. Dan Crane commenting on the DNA evidence. The other thing, just to go back, that brings us to an end for the information. I wanted to just mention a few things back here. When Rosalind Franklin was doing the X-ray crystallography, it appears, according to James Watson, she did not know how to read the images that she was taking with the X-rays. She'd gone to France to study the X-ray crystallography, and it was very time-consuming to extract DNA and concentrate it and crystallize it so it could be hit with the X-rays and get these images. It made her angry, upset, and James Watson claimed that she chased him from the lab. He thought she was going to do bodily harm to him. But she did understand from her work that the sugar phosphate groups form the exterior of the molecule. She just didn't understand about the nitrogenous bases. James Watson got a hold of this information. He talked with Maurice Wilkins a little bit, because Maurice Wilkins had initially worked with Rosie Franklin. And with the information that he gathered from Maurice Wilkins and from these X-ray crystallography images, James Watson went back, and with Francis Crick, they put together what appeared to be a Tinker Toy model of the DNA molecule. And eventually they allowed Rosalind Franklin to see it. She was skeptical, but it turned out to be the correct model of DNA. But that was with the help of Rosalind Franklin. Unfortunately for her, she died before the Nobel Prize was awarded. It's believed that she would have been awarded the Nobel Prize also if she had lived that long. Well, I hope this has increased your understanding of DNA, the transfer of information, giving a little bit of background how it's been used. And you're probably familiar with many cases that I'm unfamiliar with in the use of DNA. Most DNA fingerprinting analysis that's done today is not done for putting people in prison or convicting people, but it's actually for paternity cases. We used to use blood types to determine if a child belonged to a certain man, that he might be the father. But now they use DNA, and they could exclude people with the blood, but it didn't necessarily give a lot of support for it. They mostly went on the mother's word of who the father would be. Nowadays they have the DNA, and so with a high degree of certainty they can determine whether a man is the biological father of a child or not. And that's what most DNA work is done, what it's used for here in the United States. Hope you do well on the tests. If you have any questions, be sure and let me know.